Amen. Of course, we know our study on Wednesday evenings concerning a passage of scriptures that we find in Mark chapter 8 and verse 34, where Jesus, when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And we know that there are parallel passages to that one in Matthew 16, verse 24, and also Luke accounts it in Luke chapter 9 and verse 23. And of course, our focus on that statement has been where Jesus said, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself. And we've looked in lesson 1 at what self-denial is. We saw that there were other words that are translated in the scriptures, sometimes depending upon the translation you use. But we see the word self-control, we see the word temperate, and we see the word temperance. All of these words have reference to deny self. In lesson 2, we looked at the fact that God demands self-denial. It's not just a suggestion, it is a command, and we need to treat it as a command, just as we would Mark 16:16. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. And we looked at lesson 3. We looked at the first part of the lesson, first part of that lesson being with the fact that we need to put God's will first. And that's one of the hardest aspects of denying self, is laying aside our will and putting God's will first. And because it's so difficult, that's why we've spent really 2 lessons looking at how we are to put God's word first. We looked at that in lessons 3 and also in lesson 4. It was in lesson 5 that we had last week that we looked at the word, at defining the word meekness. And just to sort of recall ourselves what we have gone over in that lesson, meekness plays a major part in learning to deny self. And yet meekness is not easily defined. In fact, we talked about how that others think that meekness is a quality that is the same as weakness. So to them, that's what they equate meekness with, weakness. And to them, or to others, we talked about how that they think that meekness is a quality over which we really don't have any control. In other words, they say we either have meekness or we don't. We're either born with it or we don't. We're not born with it. And so to them, meekness is something that we have no control over. And it's because of these false concepts of meekness that makes it even more difficult to get the word and to understand the word meekness in the way in which we find it used in the scriptures. We looked at several verses where we saw that God truly demands meekness. And we drew 2 conclusions from those verses that we looked at. We looked at the fact that since God commands meekness, then it must not involve weakness. And I hope that's what we come away from just the verses that we looked at. There were others that, of course, deal with it, but in just the ones that we looked at, I hope that we come away with that conclusion that since it is that God commands it, then certainly meekness does not involve weakness. And the other thing I hope that we come away from a conclusion of looking at those verses is that we do have control over whether or not we are meek. It's not something that we're born with or not born with. It's something that we must be in complete control as far as exercising it as a virtue. And in the rest of our study of lesson 5, we looked at the Greek dictionaries of the word. We looked at Vine, we looked at Thayer, who are two of the most familiar of the dictionaries that gives us the definition of the Greek words. And then we looked at some just conventional dictionary definitions of the word. And we also looked at some various commentaries that made comment concerning the word meekness. And at the end of our study last week, I hope that this is what we conclude concerning meekness. That is, meekness involves humility toward God and man. Not just one or the other, but both. Meekness involves humility toward God and man. The other thing that I hope that we learned is that meekness involves submission to God's will. And I hope that's what we discovered in lessons 3 and 4. And the other thing that we learned about what meekness involves is it involves accepting the discipline that we receive. That meekness involves gentleness and goodness and mildness. And the fifth thing that we hope took away from our study of lesson 5 is that meekness involves the very thing we're talking about in our entire study, self-control. Meekness involves self-control. It involves inner strength. So tonight we begin with lesson 6. And as I've said, we're going to actually be doing 3 lessons on this subject because, as we said to start out with lesson 5, meekness has such a major role in denying self. So tonight we're looking at some examples of meekness, and there are 2 notable cases of meekness in the Bible. And this is not to say that these are the only cases. By no means. Don't take that to be the conclusion that there's only 2 examples. There are numerous, but the 2 that has the word meek specifically stated in reference to them are the 2 that we're going to be looking at. But these are, as we've said, the 2 in which the word meek is used to describe these individuals. The first one we want to look at is Moses. In Numbers chapter 12 and verse 3, let's start at the back and come front. But White, read Numbers 12, verse 3.
Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men that were upon the face of the earth.
All right. So here we see specifically stated Moses. Moses was very meek. And that's the word meek that we find in the King James and in the American Standard. If you were to look at the New King James, you would see the word humble in the place of the word meek. And when we look at the characteristics of Moses, the fact that he was very meek, the characteristics of Moses was that he suffered patiently those that opposed him, those that were in opposition to him. And there are 2 specific cases of that being the case. One is in the 12th chapter of the book of Numbers, and the other one is in the 16th chapter of the book of Numbers. So, as I call on you, we're going to break these up into 5 verses apiece. So let's start with Numbers 12 and read what we find in those first 15 verses. So, Brother Rex, read those first. They're up on the screen.
And Miriam and Aaron spake to Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard him. Now the man of Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. And the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses and unto Aaron and to Miriam, Come out, ye three, into the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out. And the Lord came down in the pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth.
All right. Brother Donnie, we start with verse 6.
And he said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently not in dark speeches, and the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore, then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous.
All right. Bill, verse 11.
And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed, when he cometh out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out from this camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again. And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again.
All right. So here's what we read concerning this opposition. It was at the hands of Miriam and Aaron, his own brothers and sisters. And it seems that what they question him about is really not, not the real reason behind. It seems that the real reason behind was spoken of in verse 1. They were upset because Moses had married an Ethiopian woman. And sometimes you see that to be the case. Sometimes the things that people come out and say things against are really not the things that are really upsetting them. It's something else. But still, in their being upset over what he did in his marriage to the Ethiopian, they, of course, began to question Moses concerning the authority that he has, the leadership that he has been showing now in the children of Israel and bringing them out of Egyptian bondage and on their way to land of Canaan. So we see here, and let's look at the next one, and that's in Numbers, the 16th chapter. Pretty long reading, but nobody's in a hurry, are you? All right. Let's pick up with Philip, beginning with verse 1.
And Korah, the son of Azarel, the son of Korah, the son of Levi, and Durham and Abram, the son of Levi, and on the son of Perth, sons of Reuben, took men, and they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princesses of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, You take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore, then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. And when Moses heard it, he fell upon his face, and he spake unto Korah and unto the company, saying, Even to the morrow the Lord will show who are his, and who is holy, and will cause him to come nearer to him. Even him who he hath chosen, he will cause to come near him, nearer to him.
Okay. Sid, you feel like reading? I know you got, you okay? All right. Okay, verse 6.
He said he would pass. He
Oh, he passed, okay, I'm sorry, didn't hear you. Lee,
This do, take your censers, Korah, and all his company, and put fire therein, and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord doth choose, he shall be holy. Ye take too much upon you, ye sons of Levi. And Moses said unto Korah, Hear, I pray you, ye sons of Levi. Seemeth it but a small thing unto you that the God of Israel hath separated you from the congregation of Israel, to bring you near to himself to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister unto them. And he hath brought thee near to him, and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee, and seek ye the priesthood also?
all right, and Tim, verse 11.
For which cause both thou and all thy company are gathered together against the Lord, and what is Aaron that ye murmur against him?
I'm sorry.
And
Go.
Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, We will not come up. Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of the land that floweth with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, except thou make thyself altogether a prince over us? Moreover, thou hast not brought us into a land that floweth with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Wilt thou put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. And Moses was very wroth, and said to the Lord, Respect not thou their offering. I have not taken one ass from them, neither have I heard one of them.
All right, Brother White.
Moses said unto Korah, Be thou and all thy company before the Lord, thou, they, Aaron, tomorrow. And take every man his censer, and put incense in them, and bring ye before the Lord every man his censer, 250 censers, thou also and Aaron, each of you his censer. And he took every man his censer, and put fire in them, and laid incense thereon, and stood in the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. And the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying,
All right, Jeff, you feel like reading?
Yeah.
All right, verse 21.
Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell upon their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and wilt thou be wroth with all the congregation? And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speaking to the congregation, saying, Get you up from about the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan and Abiram. And Moses rose up and went unto Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him.
All right, Reuben, verse 26.
And he spake unto the congregation, saying, Depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in all their sins. So they got up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan and Abiram on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of the tents, and their wives and their sons and their little children. And Moses said, Hereby you shall know that the Lord hath sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of mine own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up, all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick to the pit, then you shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord.
All right. You're pointing
You skipped Rod. You skipped Rodney.
No, I had them to read the very first verse. Didn't I?
No, but that's okay. I didn't think about it. I think you started in the back with Gerald, and then you started back in the front.
That's right. Thank you, Tim. Sorry about that. So, verse 31. We'll go ahead and pick it up, Rodney.
Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the men of Korah, So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. Then all of Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up also. And the fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense.
All right. Stephen, 36.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest, that he take up the censers out of the burning, and scatter thou the fire yonder, for they are hallowed. The censers of these sinners against their own souls, let them make them broad plates for a covering of the altar, for they offered them before the Lord. Therefore they are hallowed, and they shall be a sign unto the children of Israel. And Eleazar the priest took the brazen censers, wherewith that they were burnt had offered, and they were made broad plates for a covering of the altar, to be a memorial unto the children of Israel, that no stranger, which is not of the seed of Aaron, come near to offer incense before the Lord, that he be not as Korah and his company, as the Lord said to him by the hand of Moses.
All right. And remember your name. Go ahead.
Well, the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, You have killed the people of the Lord. And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of the meeting. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Get away from the midst of the congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell on their faces.
All right. Glenn, you feel like? No. Brother Deb, verse 46.
And Moses said unto Aaron, Take a censer and put fire therein from off the altar, and put on incense, and go quickly into the congregation, and make an atonement for them. For there is wrath gone out from the Lord, the plague is begun. And Aaron took up, as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation, and behold, the plague was begun among the people, and he put on incense and made an atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stayed. Now they that died of the plague were 14,700, besides them that died about the matter of Korah. And they returned to Moses and to the door of the tabernacle and the congregation, and the plague was stayed.
So we see the second thing that we want to take note in showing to ourselves that certainly Moses suffered patiently with those who opposed him. And what we see in both of these instances, but in also Numbers chapter 12 with Miriam and Aaron, he controlled himself. See, this is no indication in all of what we've read here that Moses, as we sometimes use that expression, flew off the handle and got mad. No, Moses was very deliberate, very resourceful in the opposition that was being made against him, even from his own family members and even from those of his own kinsmen that made up the children of Israel. So, two, any questions on either of those oppositions, by the way? We read a lot and sourced the kind of Dathan, Korah, and Abiram certainly are stories that need to stick in our minds concerning when things are questioned in regards to what God has already set in motion. And that's what we actually see occurring. They said, we're holy too. So, but anyway, we see how it is that when God makes the decisions, when God's word, as it has been settled in heaven, what we're up against when we go contrary, when we go different. Bill.
Brother Law, to me, it's, for lack of better words, it's interesting to note that the sins of Korah and his so-called friends resulted in the death of a number of other people. who are not mentioned in that.
Yeah.
And it makes me reflect upon, for instance, Adam. The consequences of his sin has affected up to us today
Good point.
and thereafter. Therefore, Bill needs to be aware and be careful about his everyday life, because Bill's sin can affect others adversely.
Absolutely. It's a very good point. The other thing we see about a characteristic of Moses and the meekness of which he is said to be, he was submissive to God. In Exodus 34, let's read verses 1 and 4, Brother George.
The Lord said unto Moses, hew ye 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first table which thou broke. And hew 2 tables of stone like unto the first. And Moses rose up early in the morning and went up into the mountain Sinai, and the Lord commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tables of stone.
Of course, we know this is the second after the first tablets of stone had been engraved. And when Moses came down from the mountain, the episode of when the people had talked Aaron into making the golden calf. They were dancing, they were doing all manner of evil. When Moses returned, Moses broke those stones, and we find that we're going to be reading really a case of that a couple of chapters later when we get on down into the verses. So we're not going to a lot of detail now, but we see Moses being submissive. He's already done this once, but now he's having to do it again. And despite that fact, despite all of what has occurred that has brought this about, Moses, very humble, very meek, he went and done again what God told him to do. God, he was always, not just in this case, but in every case, except the case of Numbers chapter 20. Brother George?
I'd like to make a point about what it said in these verses. It said, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were on the first table.
Uh,
Right? Go to, I think, this same chapter, I think about verse 27, 28.
Hmm.
And God told Moses to write it.
Yeah.
And then Moses wrote it, the words that were on the first.
Yeah.
So God did write it,
Right,
but God wrote it when Moses does what he told him to.
right. It's a good point. Good point. Appreciate
It's
it.
like when the Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. The Bible said God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. But when it was destroyed, the angels told Lot, said, get thee out, for God had sent us to destroy this place. God destroyed it, and them 2 angels destroyed it. God destroyed it.
That's very true. God always accomplishes his will, and he sets out and does it, whether it be through various other means, like you pointed out. That's true. And he was humble. Look at Exodus 4 and verse 10, Byron.
And Moses said unto Jehovah, O Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken to thy servant. I am slow to speak, and of slow tongue.
Of course, you know this was when Moses is initially being called to go to the children of Israel and lead them out of Egypt. God appears to him in a burning bush, and he summons Moses to go. And of course, Moses has questions concerning, who am I to say has sent me? And that's when God made the declaration, tell them that I am has sent thee. And then, of course, we see humbleness on the part of Moses. I think more times than not, sermons that I know that I have preached and sermons that I've heard others preach in this particular verse is more along the line of Moses making excuses for himself. And that very well may be the case, but in the making of those excuses, he's stating facts to be true, or else God would not have allowed Aaron to be the spokesman. So obviously what Moses was saying about himself was true. And he could have been using them not so much maybe as excuses, but as reasons in his mind as to why he was not going to be the one to go and to lead the children of Israel. But in the expressions of what he uses here, he says, I'm not eloquent, neither heretofore nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant. In other words, I wasn't eloquent before you ever appeared to me in this bush, and I'm not eloquent now. And I'm not likely to change and be eloquent. I am what I am as far as not being an eloquent man. I'm slow of speech. I'm slow of tongue. Well, no doubt these could actually be statements of fact that were true that Moses was given. And of course, we know as the verses go on and say, it is to be Aaron that will be the spokesman for Moses. But still, we see humbleness on the part of this man, and that blends in with what we've read there in Numbers 12 and verse 3. He was a very meek man. And yet, despite patiently enduring those that opposed him, despite controlling himself under those circumstances and others, despite being submissive to God, and despite being humble to God, he was a man of courage, and he was a man of strength. In Exodus 32, verses 19 through 21, Rodney, read those for us.
So it was, as soon as he came near the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. So Moses' anger became hot. He cast the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Then he took the calf which they had made, burned it in the fire, ground it to powder, and he scattered it on the water and made the children of Israel drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought so great a sin upon them?
All right, so this is what we were referring to when we were talking about his submission to God in chapter 34 of going back the second time and receiving the law. This is the first instance of Moses. He had stayed what the children of Israel considered was too long. They used that as a excuse, a reason that, well, we don't know what's happened to him. Anything could have happened to him. He may be dead, but we don't know what's happened to him. So they used that to encourage Aaron, which Aaron should not have done to start with. But anyway, he collected all of their gold and made this molten image. Apparently, Aaron was a craftsman in that kind of trade, that kind of artwork. And he formed a golden calf. And this is what Moses sees when he comes down from the mountain. He first hears the commotion, here's the party, here's the excitement, the extravaganza of what all was going on. That many times it was involved in idol worship was a lot of sin involved, a lot of sin in multiple areas. And so that's what Moses hears, and then he sees it with his eyes. And then when he does, that's what we've read here in these verses. He saw the calf, he saw the dancing, and his anger waxed hot. And yet we still see in all of this that his anger is like what we're going to see in reference to Jesus. It was a righteous indignation, because this is what the children, as he said in the very last verse, what did this people undo that thou hast brought so great a sin? See, that's what Moses was looking at. This is sin of what's taking place here. The making of the idol calf, all of the carousing and everything that was going on in the association, this is sin. And so this is the anger that Moses had that waxed hot. Any questions on Moses concerning his meekness and the characteristics that we can see of it? All right, then there's Jesus. In Matthew 11 and verse 29, Brother Rex, read that for us.
I am meek and lowly in heart.
Jesus said, I am meek and lowly in heart. And of course, this word meek is in the King James and the American Standard. We see another instance of meekness in reference to Jesus in Matthew chapter 21 and verse 5. Brother Donnie, read that for us.
Tell you the daughter of Zion, behold, thy king cometh unto thee, meek and sitting upon an ass, and a colt of the foal of an ass.
All right. So here is later on in the life of Jesus. He's about to go into Jerusalem. We sometimes refer to this as his triumphant ride into Jerusalem. But in reference to that, the prophecy that was quoted was, tell you the daughters of Zion, behold, your king comes unto thee meek and sitting upon an ass. So again, in reference to Jesus, we see the word meek. And then there's a statement that Paul makes in 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 1, Bill.
Now I, Paul, myself beseech you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am base among you, but being absent am bold toward you.
So here Paul is urging, he's begging, he's pleading with the Corinthians. And he's doing this, he says, by the meekness and the gentleness of Christ. So again, we see meekness being conveyed in regards to the man that Christ was. Meekness and gentleness. And so we see Paul said, I beseech you in that same manner of which Jesus' manner of meekness and gentleness. And he says that even though I'm base among you, even being absent, I'm bold towards you. All right, so we see these verses that beyond any shadow of doubt attribute the trait, the characteristic of meek to the Lord, to Christ. And so Jesus, like Moses, first bell, Jesus, like Moses, demonstrated the qualities of meekness. He was submissive to the will of his Father. In Matthew 26, verses 39 and 42, read for us, if you will, Brother Philip.
And he went a little further, fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. He went again the second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done.
We know that this is one of those times of the life of Christ that we really put a lot of emphasis on, and rightly so. It shows that here was one who was equal with God, but yet he submitted to God. You and I are not equal to God. So does that tell us how much the more submissive that we ought to be toward him? And of course, this is the prayer that he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying for the cup, that death that he knew he was staring in the face was coming. Lord, let this cup pass from me, but yet, nevertheless, not as my will, not as I will, but as thy will. And he did that the second time. So he was submissive to the will of his Father. When he suffered, Peter tells us he suffered patiently. 1 Peter 2, verses 21 and 22. Tim?
For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that ye should follow his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. who, when he was reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously.
So Jesus' suffering was of such a nature, and the meekness is so evident that his suffering is an example for us. Said, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow his steps. So what do we know about Jesus? He's meek. What do we know about when he suffered? He suffered patiently. We're to follow his steps. So when we suffer, we need to, you holding your hand up?
Yeah, I was just,
Thought you were sitting on me the second bell. Go ahead.
the Philippian writer, speaking of being born with it, Christ made a decision to be gentle and meek. He said, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ, who being in the form of God didn't consider it robbery to be equal with God, but he made himself of no reputation, taking on the form, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself like he did.
You did. He
It's a
controlled.
choice we make.
Right. So it's not something we either have or we don't have, born with or not. But it's something that we have to determine, as Jesus did. I know our time is not going to get us through the third characteristic, so let's mark our places, Lord willing, to start there. And it will be a couple of weeks till we get back. And I guess we'll go ahead and pass out lesson 7. And you can be looking on that because the chances are we'll finish up with this lesson 6 and get on into, thank you, lesson 7.